Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision. It feels like engineering, like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the screen, and the doctor just points and says, well, there it is, broken.
Right, it's binary. I mean,
Yeah.
you either have a broken bone or you don't. It's clean, it's visible, and honestly, it's comforting because it's just so easily categorized.
Yeah, exactly. But then you step into the world of criminal law, suddenly that x-ray machine it's totally broken. You're looking at a legal landscape that is, frankly, incredibly murky.
Oh, absolutely.
You can't always see a clean, jagged line between someone who just made, like, a careless mistake and someone who is legally a murderer.
That is the perfect way to look at it, because criminal law, especially when we talk about offenses against the person, is all about drawing invisible lines. We are judging intent, we are judging risks, and we are judging what a reasonable person would do, and those lines get blurry very fast.
Right. And look, if you're listening to this deep dive right now, you are most likely studying for the MBE. You're getting ready for the multi-state bar examination, and we know exactly how much pressure is on you.
So much pressure.
The test makers, they love to exploit those blurry lines. I mean, they just love to set traps for you.
They absolutely do. But listen, by the time we finish today, you are going to know how to spot every single one of those traps.
Exactly. Our mission today is straightforward. We are going to help you master criminal law, specifically focusing on offenses against the person.
The big ones.
Yeah. We have a massive stack of legal notes here covering battery, assault, mayhem, homicide, false imprisonment, and kidnapping. And we are giving you this information in simple English.
Very simple. No complicated jargon.
We are going to break down these complex rules into short, easy-to-digest pieces, and we are going to recap these rules frequently so they actually stick in your memory.
Right, because we aren't just going to sit here and read rules to you. We are going to look at the why behind the rules. If you understand why a court created a specific legal boundary, well, you won't have to rely on blind memorization.
You'll just know it.
Exactly. You'll just understand the underlying logic. And that makes the right answer super obvious when you're sitting in that exam room.
Okay, let's jump right in. We need to start at the foundation. The most basic way people harm each other physically is by touching someone unlawfully, or by threatening to touch them.
Right. Battery and assault.
Yeah. I want to start with battery. Give me the absolute simplest definition, just plain English.
Okay. Battery is applying unlawful force to someone else, resulting in either bodily injury or an offensive touch. That's the entire core of it. Most of the time, a simple battery is just a misdemeanor.
Okay, but let's unpack the intent part, because this is where the bar examiners immediately try to trick you, right?
Big time.
Like, if I'm taking the test and a question says the defendant did not specifically plan to hurt the victim, my brain automatically thinks, okay, no plan, no battery.
And that is a massive MBE trap. Honestly, if you're taking notes, write this down in huge letters. You do not need specific intent to commit a battery.
Wait, really? No specific intent?
None. Specific intent means you had a conscious desire or a real plan to cause that specific harm. Battery doesn't require that at all. General intent is entirely enough.
Okay, let's translate general intent into plain English. What does it actually look like in the real world? Like, give me an example.
So in modern courts, general intent usually just means criminal negligence. It means you're acting with an extreme, reckless disregard for the safety of others. You didn't wake up and say, I'm going to punch John in the face today.
Right.
But maybe you decided to swing a heavy metal pipe around in a crowded room just for fun. You didn't specifically intend to hit John, but you were acting so dangerously that hitting someone was highly likely. When that pipe hits John, you are guilty of battery.
I see. So the law essentially says your wild carelessness is just as blameworthy as a planned attack.
Exactly. The test will give you a fact pattern where a person is acting like a complete fool, spinning around with a heavy object, and they hit someone. And the question will explicitly state that the defendant had no specific intent to strike the victim.
They are begging you to choose the answer that says not guilty.
Yes. You have to ignore that bait. Criminal negligence equals battery.
Wow. Okay. What about the physical touch itself? Does it have to be like skin-to-skin contact? If I punch someone with my fist, that's obvious. But what if I use something else?
Indirect force is completely sufficient for battery. You do not have to lay a single finger on the victim. You just have to set the force or the substance into motion.
Let's use the examples from our sources because I really want to make this vivid for the listener.
Okay, imagine two scenarios. Scenario one, you have a highly trained attack dog. You point at a victim and give the attack command.
Yeah.
The dog bites the victim. You never touched the person. You were standing 10 feet away. But you set that force in motion. You applied unlawful force indirectly. That is a battery.
That makes total sense. I mean, the dog is basically just an extension of your weapon. What's the second scenario?
Scenario 2. You slip a poisonous substance into someone's coffee cup. You smile, hand them the cup, and walk away. They drink it an hour later and suffer internal injuries. Again, you never physically struck them, but you caused an offensive, harmful substance to touch their internal organs. That is also a battery.
Sneaky. And the bar examiners love testing those indirect applications of force. Now, our notes mention something called aggravated battery. If simple battery is a misdemeanor, what elevates it to a felony?
Well, most jurisdictions have statutes that identify 3 common triggers for aggravated battery. The first trigger is using a deadly weapon. And keep in mind, a deadly weapon isn't just a gun or a knife. It's any object used in a way that is likely to cause death or serious injury.
So if you take a heavy glass lamp and smash it over someone's head, that lamp is a deadly weapon.
Precisely. The ordinary nature of the object doesn't matter. It's how you wield it.
What are the other 2 triggers?
The second trigger is the result of the battery. If you cause serious bodily injury, it's aggravated. Like a light bruise is simple battery. A shattered jaw is aggravated battery. And the third trigger is based on who the victim is. Many states make it an aggravated battery if the victim is a police officer, a child, or a woman.
Got it. Let's talk about defenses quickly. What if 2 people willingly agree to a fist fight? They go out behind a bar, they shake hands, and they say, let's fight. If one gets a black eye, can he sue or press charges? Or does consent protect the winner?
The general rule for criminal law is that the victim's consent is not a valid defense to a battery charge. Society just doesn't allow people to agree to commit crimes against each other. The state has an interest in keeping the peace. So even if they both agreed, they can both be charged with battery.
But there have to be exceptions, right? I mean, people tackle each other in football games every Sunday. Surgeons cut people open every day.
Yes, those are the recognized exceptions: medical operations and sporting events. When you step onto a football field, you are giving valid consent to the normal, foreseeable contacts of the game. You consent to being tackled.
Right.
But you don't consent to the opposing quarterback pulling a knife out of his sock and stabbing you. Consent only covers the reasonable scope of the activity.
Okay, time for our first mini recap. Listener, we are going to do this constantly so you can lock these rules in. Battery is an unlawful physical touch. It can be completely indirect, like commanding a dog or using poison. The biggest MBE trap here is intent. You only need general intent, which means criminal negligence. Do not fall for the no specific intent trick. Finally, aggravated battery involves deadly weapons, serious injuries, or protected classes of victims, and you can't just consent to a street fight.
That is a perfect summary. Let's move from the actual physical touch to the threat of a touch. We are moving to assault. In simple English, assault involves no actual touching. The moment a touch happens, the crime upgrades to a battery. Assault is all about the attempt or the fear.
Okay, so how is assault defined across most jurisdictions?
Well, most states recognize 2 different ways to commit an assault. The first way is an attempted battery. So you swing your fist at someone's face, but they duck and you miss. You try to commit a battery, but you failed. That swing is an assault.
That seems pretty straightforward. What is the second way?
The second way is the intentional creation of a reasonable apprehension of imminent bodily harm. Let's break that down into plain English. You intentionally make someone reasonably scared that they are about to get hurt right this very second.
Right this very second. Okay, let me test the limits of this. If I'm angry at a coworker and I send them an email that says, I'm going to beat you up next Tuesday, is that an assault?
No, for 2 reasons. First, the law says mere words are not enough. You have to back up your words with some kind of physical action or show of force. You have to raise a fist or step toward them aggressively or pull back your coat to show a weapon.
Okay, words aren't enough.
Right. And second, the fear has to be of imminent harm. Imminent means right now, immediate. A threat to do something next Tuesday is not imminent.
Okay, so words aren't enough, and it has to be a threat for right now. But our sources point out a massive MBE trap here regarding assault statutes. It's called the presentability trap. Walk us through this.
This is where reading the exact wording of the question is critical. The MBE will sometimes give you a specific statute to apply. Some of these older statutes define assault only as an attempted battery coupled with a present ability to succeed.
Let's use the unloaded gun example from the text because it really highlights how weird this rule is. Person A points a gun at person B. Person A pulls the trigger. Person B is absolutely terrified because he thinks he's about to die, but the gun is completely unloaded, and person A knew it was unloaded.
Right. So if the state uses the modern definition, intentional creation of fear, then person A is guilty of assault. Person B was scared of imminent harm. But if the test question tells you to apply a statute that requires a present ability to succeed, then person A is not guilty of assault.
Wait, I really want to push back on that. Person B was terrified. He thought he was looking down the barrel of his own death. How is that not an assault?
I know it feels morally wrong, but you have to separate your feelings from the strict mechanics of the law. Under that specific older statute, the crime requires you to actually have the physical ability to complete the battery at that exact moment.
And you can't shoot someone with an unloaded gun.
Exactly. It is physically impossible. Therefore, you lack the present ability to succeed. Because you lack an element of the statute, you cannot be guilty of assault.
That is a brutal trap. A listener, if you see the words presentability on the test, the unloaded gun is a trick. The examiner wants you to feel bad for the terrified victim. You have to ignore your sympathy and apply the mechanical rule. No bullets means no presentability, which means no assault.
Perfectly said.
Let's do a quick mini recap of assault. Assault is either a missed swing, an attempted battery, or making someone reasonably fear an immediate hit. Mere words are never enough. It has to be an imminent threat. And watch out for the presentability rule. If a statute requires it, an unloaded gun is not an assault, no matter how scared the victim is.
You're doing great. Now let's look at what happens when that basic battery goes terribly wrong. We're talking about when a physical attack leaves a permanent mark. Historically, this had a very specific name, mayhem.
Mayhem. I mean, it's one of those words that sounds like a movie title. Does anyone actually get charged with mayhem today?
It's rare to see it called that today, but the concept is highly tested because of its common law roots. At strict common law, mayhem was a very specific felony. It wasn't just bruising someone, it required the dismemberment or the permanent disablement of a bodily part.
Why did they need a whole separate crime just for limbs? Why wasn't that just a really bad battery?
This is a great historical detail that explains the why behind the rule. The crime of mayhem originally existed specifically to protect the king. The king relied on his subjects to serve in his military. If you permanently ruined a man's body part, you weren't just hurting your neighbor. You were stealing a soldier from the king's army.
Oh, wow. So it was basically like treason adjacent. You were destroying military property.
Precisely. That's why the specific body part mattered so much. If you cut off a man's ear in a bar fight, historically, that might not have been mayhem. You don't need a right ear to hold a shield or swing a sword, but if you cut off his thumb or ruined his eye, he couldn't fight. That was mayhem.
That is a fascinating way to remember it. So common law mayhem equals ruining a soldier for the king. What does the modern law look like?
Modern statutes have mostly abolished the requirement that the injury must affect military fighting ability. The recent trend is just to treat these injuries as a very serious form of aggravated battery. Some states still use the word mayhem, but they've expanded it to include permanent disfigurement.
So if someone throws acid in a victim's face, they can still fight in an army, but their face is permanently disfigured. Under modern law, that's mayhem.
Yes, under modern law, acid attacks and permanent facial disfigurement qualify. Just be aware that a few states require the prosecution to prove the defendant had a specific intent to maim or disfigure, not just a general intent to hit them.
Okay, listener, here is your mini recap for mayhem. Keep it incredibly simple. Common law mayhem means disabling a body part so the person can't fight for the king. Modern mayhem is usually just a specialized aggravated battery that covers permanent disfigurement.
All right, now we are stepping into the deep end of the pool. We are moving from hurting a body part to taking a human life. We need to talk about homicide and malice.
Listener, this is where you need to focus all your attention. This is the biggest, most heavily tested area on the entire MBE. You will see these homicide questions over and over again. We are going to take this slowly. Let's start with the definition of murder.
At common law, murder is defined as the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought.
Let me stop you right there. Malice aforethought. When I hear that phrase, I picture an evil villain. I picture someone sitting in a dark room for 3 weeks, writing out a master plan to kill someone they deeply hate. It sounds like pure, calculating evil. Is that what it actually means?
No. And that is exactly what the bar examiners hope you think. Listen carefully. Malice aforethought is just a legal label. Think of it like a sticker the court slaps on your file. It does not require a long, evil plan. It doesn't even require actual hatred or malice toward the victim.
So what does that label actually mean for the test?
It just means that at the exact moment the killing happened, the defendant had one of four specific states of mind. If you possess any one of these four mindsets, the law automatically prints out that malice aforethought sticker and puts it on your case. You are guilty of murder.
We need to go through these four states of mind one by one. You must memorize these four things. What is state of mind number one?
Number one is the most obvious: intent to kill. You point a loaded gun at someone's chest and pull the trigger because you want them to die. The law calls this express malice. It's direct and clear.
Okay, simple enough. I want them dead, I act on it, they die. Express malice. What is state of mind number two?
Number two is intent to inflict great bodily injury. You didn't actually want to kill the person. You just wanted to hurt them really, really badly. But they ended up dying anyway. The law calls this implied malice, and it is still murder.
I want to make sure I understand the line here. If I just want to break someone's legs and they die, I'm a murderer. That feels like a big leap if I truly didn't want them dead.
The law makes that leap intentionally. Let's say you take a heavy baseball bat and you decide to shatter someone's kneecaps. Your only goal is to put them in a wheelchair. But while you're smashing their legs, you sever a major artery. They bleed to death on the floor. You can't stand in front of a judge and say, Your Honor, I only intended to cripple him, not kill him. The law implies malice because intending to cause extreme bodily harm is so dangerous that death is a highly likely outcome.
Got it. State of mind one is intent to kill. State of mind two is intent to cause great bodily harm. What is state of mind number three?
Number three is reckless indifference to an unjustifiably high risk to human life. Sometimes you'll see courts use a very poetic phrase for this: acting with an abandoned and malignant heart.
Abandoned and malignant heart. It sounds like Shakespeare. What does it mean in simple English?
It means you did something so incredibly dangerous, so wildly reckless, that you had to know someone might die. You didn't specifically target anyone, you didn't intend to hurt anyone, but your actions showed you simply did not care about human life. This is also a form of implied malice.
Let's use the bowling ball example from our sources, because this perfectly illustrates the concept.
Imagine you are standing on a highway overpass. Cars are zooming by at 70 miles per hour below you. You are holding a heavy bowling ball. You aren't angry at any specific driver, you are just bored. You decide to drop the bowling ball off the bridge right into the traffic.
I mean, it's an insanely stupid thing to do.
Extremely stupid and extremely deadly. The ball crashes through a windshield and kills a driver instantly. When you get arrested, you say, I didn't intend to kill anyone. I was just dropping a ball. The court will say your behavior was an unjustifiably high risk to human life. You showed reckless indifference. That is an abandoned and malignant heart. That is murder.
Wow. So the law basically says your extreme stupidity is legally identical to a planned assassination.
Exactly. Now, what is the fourth state of mind?
I've got this one. It's the intent to commit a felony. This is the famous felony murder rule.
Yes. We're going to spend an entire section diving deep into felony murder later because it's massive. But the short version is, if your intent is to commit a dangerous felony like robbery or arson, and someone dies during that crime, the law implies malice aforethought. It is murder.
Let's recap those four states of mind. This is vital. 1, intent to kill. 2, intent to cause great bodily harm. 3, reckless indifference to human life like the bowling ball off the bridge. 4, intent to commit a felony. If you have any of these four, you have the malice aforethought label, you have committed murder.
Now, proving what's inside someone's head is hard for prosecutors. So the law created a special rule to help juries find this intent. It's called the deadly weapon rule.
How does that help the jury?
The rule states that if a defendant intentionally uses a deadly weapon, the jury is legally allowed to infer that the defendant intended to kill. It creates a permissive inference.
But earlier we said a deadly weapon isn't just a gun or a knife.
Right. It's any instrument used in a manner likely to produce death. Our notes give 3 excellent examples of how broad this rule is. First example, someone intentionally pilots a heavy motorized speedboat right through a designated swimming area filled with people.
Okay.
A boat isn't normally a weapon, but using it that way turns it into a deadly weapon. If someone is chopped up by the propeller, the jury can infer intent to kill.
What's the second example?
Second example, someone fires a gun into a crowded room. Even if the defendant claims they aimed at the ceiling just to scare people, firing a bullet into a dense crowd is using a deadly weapon. The jury can infer intent to kill.
And the third example is the most interesting one to me.
A professional heavyweight boxer gets into an argument with a tavern owner. The boxer viciously beats the tavern owner with his bare hands, and the owner dies. Normally, hands aren't deadly weapons. But because of the boxer's professional training and immense power, his fists can be considered deadly weapons. The jury can infer intent to kill just from his punches.
That is a great MBE fact to remember. Your own hands can be deadly weapons if you have specialized training. Here is your mini recap for homicide and malice. Murder requires malice aforethought. Don't let that phrase fool you. It's not an evil, long-term plan. It's just one of 4 mindsets: intent to kill, intent to hurt badly, reckless indifference, or felony murder. And if you use a deadly weapon, even a speedboat or trained fists, a jury can assume you intended to kill.
Excellent. But what happens if someone dies and the killer did not have malice aforethought? Or what if they did have malice, but they had a deeply understandable human reason for completely losing control?
That means we are stepping down a level. We are moving from murder to manslaughter.
Let's start with voluntary manslaughter.
Yeah.
This is a killing that would normally be classified as murder, but there is adequate provocation. You will frequently hear this called a killing in the heat of passion.
Heat of passion. So if I just get incredibly angry, like faster than normal, and I lose my temper and kill someone, does that mean I get manslaughter instead of murder?
No, the law is very strict here. You don't get a discount on a murder charge just because you have a short temper. At common law, your provocation must pass 4 very specific rigid tests. If you fail even one of these tests, it is murder.
Okay, listener, I am going to write these 4 tests down. You should too. What is test number 1?
Test 1. The provocation must be severe enough that an ordinary, reasonable person would lose their self-control. It cannot just be something that makes you specifically mad. It has to be an event that would make an average, reasonable citizen snap.
So if I have an irrational hatred of people chewing gum loudly, and I snap and kill someone for chewing gum that fails test 1, an ordinary person wouldn't snap over gum.
Exactly. What is test 2? Test 2, the defendant must have actually been provoked. They actually lost control. So the event was terrible, and the defendant truly, genuinely snapped.
Okay, what is test 3?
Test 3 is about the timeline. There must not have been enough time between the provocation and the killing for a reasonable person to cool off. This is a factual question for the jury.
So if I catch someone vandalizing my house, and I go inside, make a cup of tea, stew about it for 3 hours, and then go shoot them well, a reasonable person would have calmed down in 3 hours.
Yes. The heat of passion has an expiration date. If you have time to think, the passion is gone, becomes murder. What is the final test? Test 4. The defendant actually did not cool off.
Wait, how is that different from test 3?
Let's say only 5 minutes passed. That's a very short time. But if within those 5 minutes the defendant sat down, took deep breaths, realized what was happening, and then coldly decided to kill anyway, they actually cooled off. The heat of passion was gone. It's murder.
Let's recap those 4 tests quickly. 1, an ordinary person would snap. 2, you actually snapped. 3, not enough time for a normal person to cool off. 4, you actually didn't cool off. Now, the MBE is going to test us on what actually counts as adequate provocation. Our outline highlights a major trap here, the mere words trap. Tell me about this.
Under strict common law, mere words are never, ever enough provocation to reduce murder to manslaughter. Never. It does not matter how insulting, how hateful, or how enraging the words are. If someone hurls the most vile insults at you and you kill them, it is murder. Mere words do not equal adequate provocation.
So if a test question says, the victim yelled terrible, unforgivable insults at the defendant flew into a blind rage and shot the victim, what's the charge?
Under common law, that is murder. Now, a small caveat, some modern courts are starting to let juries decide if extreme words are enough. But on the MBE, unless the question specifically tells you to apply a modern statute, default to the strict common law rule. Mere words are not enough.
If words aren't enough, what is enough? What triggers does the law actually respect?
The law frequently recognizes 2 major triggers. First, being subjected to a serious battery or a threat of deadly force. If someone is brutally beating you with a pipe and you lose your mind to the chaos and kill them, that might be voluntary manslaughter.
And the second trigger. This is the one we see in all the movies.
Discovering your spouse in bed with another person. Catching them in the act is the ultimate classic heat of passion provocation. The law recognizes that this specific sight can cause a reasonable person to momentarily lose their mind.
I have a hypothetical. What if I honestly thought I was in terrible danger? Let's say I'm walking down a dark alley. Someone jumps out and points a metallic object at me. I think it's a gun. I pull my own gun and shoot them. But when I turn on my flashlight, I realize they were just holding a shiny cell phone. I was totally wrong. I overreacted. Is that murder?
That brings us to a very important concept called imperfect self-defense. Some states recognize this doctrine. The rule is, if you unreasonably, but honestly, believed you needed to use deadly force, your crime drops from murder to voluntary manslaughter.
Unreasonable but honest.
Yes, a reasonable person wouldn't have shot someone over a cell phone.
Yeah.
So you don't get full self-defense. You are still going to prison. But because you honestly thought you were fighting for your life, you lack the pure malice of a murderer. You get manslaughter.
That covers voluntary manslaughter, the heat of passion stuff. What about involuntary manslaughter? This is for accidents and recklessness, right?
Yes, there are two types of involuntary manslaughter. The first is criminal negligence.
We talked about this with battery. How negligent do I have to be for someone's death to be manslaughter?
It must be a gross deviation from the standard of care. It's a much bigger mistake than simple civil negligence.
So if I take my eyes off the road for 1 second to change the radio station and I had a pedestrian, that might be a civil lawsuit, but it's probably not manslaughter. But if I drive 90 miles per hour through a crosswalk while blindfolded on a dare that is a gross deviation, that is criminal negligence.
Exactly. The second type of involuntary manslaughter is unlawful act manslaughter. The most common form is the misdemeanor manslaughter rule.
Okay, I need a clear definition of this.
If you are committing a misdemeanor and someone dies as a result, you might be guilty of involuntary manslaughter. But there are strict limits. The misdemeanor must be malum in se, which is Latin for inherently wrong or evil. Or the death must be a highly foreseeable result of your crime.
The outline has a specific trap here. It's the speeding car example from the text. I want to walk through this slowly because it's really tricky.
Imagine driver K is driving down a clear, well-paved road. The weather is excellent. Driver K is driving 5 miles over the speed limit. Speeding is a misdemeanor. Suddenly, victim V dashes out from behind a thick bush right into the middle of the street. Victim V is hit by the car and dies.
Okay. Driver K was committing a misdemeanor. Someone died during it. Is driver K guilty of involuntary manslaughter?
The bar examiners desperately want you to choose yes. They want you to mechanically connect the misdemeanor to the death. But the answer is no.
Why is it no? Driver K was breaking the law.
Because driving 5 miles over the speed limit on a clear day is not inherently evil. It is not malum in se. It's just a regulatory traffic violation. Furthermore, a person suddenly leaping out of a bush is not a foreseeable consequence of driving slightly fast. Because the crime wasn't inherently evil and the death wasn't foreseeable, driver K is not guilty of manslaughter.
That is a huge MBE tip. A minor regulatory crime plus an unforeseeable death does not equal manslaughter. You have to look at the nature of the misdemeanor. Before we finish homicide, we need to quickly touch on modern statutes. The MBE might ask about degrees of murder. How do modern courts divide up murder?
Many states divide it into first degree and second degree. Under these modern schemes, all murders are initially assumed to be second degree. The prosecution has the burden to prove special facts to bump it up to first degree murder.
What facts bump it up?
The most common requirement is a deliberate and premeditated killing.
What do those specific words mean legally?
Deliberate means the defendant made the decision to kill in a cool and dispassionate state of mind. They weren't in a blind rage. Premeditated means they actually reflected on the idea of killing beforehand. They thought about it.
Do they have to plan it out for days?
No. Even a very brief period of thought is enough. A few seconds of reflection before pulling the trigger can be premeditation.
Are there any other ways to get a first-degree murder charge?
Yes. Using certain specific methods will automatically make it first degree. Using poison, using torture, or lying in wait, meaning hiding and ambushing the victim. If you use those methods, the law says it's first degree. Also, listed felony murders are first degree, which we are about to discuss.
Mini recap time. Voluntary manslaughter is the heat of passion. Remember the spouse in bed or a serious beating. The mere words trap is huge words are never enough. Imperfect self-defense also drops murder to voluntary manslaughter. Involuntary manslaughter is gross criminal negligence or a minor crime gone wrong. But remember, the speeding car, the minor crime death must be foreseeable. Finally, first-degree murder requires cool reflection or a nasty method like poison. All other murders are second degree.
That was a lot of material, but you summarized it perfectly. Now take a deep breath. We are moving to the most complex part of homicide, the felony murder rule and its limits.
Listener, sit up and pay close attention. This rule is massive on the MBE. It is so heavily tested that it requires its own deep dive. We mentioned it earlier as the fourth type of malice aforethought. Let's start with the basic rule in plain English.
Here's the core rule. If you are committing a felony or attempting to commit a felony and someone dies during it, you are legally guilty of murder.
Let me push back on how harsh this is. What if the death was a total freak accident? What if I never intended to hurt anyone?
It doesn't matter. The law implies the malice from your intent to commit the dangerous felony. If you walk into a bank to rob it, and you are holding a plastic toy gun, and the bank teller is so frightened that she has a fatal heart attack, you are guilty of murder. Your intent to commit the robbery transferred into malice for the death.
What if I'm not acting alone? What if I'm the getaway driver?
If you are in a conspiracy to commit a felony, the net is cast even wider. You are legally liable for deaths caused by your partners in crime, as long as the death was a foreseeable result of the felony and was done in furtherance of the conspiracy.
Because this rule is so incredibly harsh, the courts have created limitations to rein it in. The bar examiners will test you relentlessly on these limitations. There are 5 major limitations. Let's outline them clearly.
Limitation number 1. The underlying felony. To be guilty of felony murder, you must actually be legally guilty of the underlying felony itself. If you have a valid defense to the robbery, you have a valid defense to the felony murder.
Let me make sure I understand how defenses work here. If my defense is that I was legally insane during the robbery, does that save me from the felony murder charge?
Yes, insanity is a substantive defense. It negates an element of the felony. If you are legally insane, you can't form the intent to rob. If you aren't guilty of robbery, you can't be guilty of robbery murder.
We both know how statute of limitations works procedurally, but how does that interact with felony murder? What if the time limit to charge me with the underlying felony has expired?
This is a great distinction. Procedural defenses do not save you from felony murder. Let's say you committed an arson 10 years ago. A homeless person died in the fire. The state forgot to charge you. The statute of limitations for arson is 5 years. They can no longer charge you with arson. But there is no statute of limitations for murder. Can they still charge you with felony murder?
I would guess no, since they can't charge the arson.
Actually, yes. You still actually committed the felony, even if a procedural rule stops them from punishing you for the arson itself.
That is tricky. Substantive defenses work. Procedural defenses do not. Got it. What is limitation number 2?
Limitation number 2. The independent felony. The felony must be independent of the killing itself. This is sometimes called the merger doctrine.
What does that mean? Why do we need this rule?
Let's look at what happens without this rule. Imagine you get into a fistfight and beat someone to death. You committed an aggravated battery and they died. If the law allowed aggravated battery to be the underlying felony for felony murder, then every single manslaughter would automatically get upgraded to first-degree felony murder. The prosecution would just say, well, the felony was battery and a death happened, so it's felony murder.
Ah, I see. That would completely destroy the difference between manslaughter and murder.
Exactly. To prevent that, the law says the felony has to be something independent of the physical harm that caused the death. It has to be a separate crime like arson, rape, robbery, or kidnapping. The felony cannot just be the assault or battery that killed the victim.
That makes perfect logical sense. Limitation number 3?
Limitation number 3 is foreseeability. Under the majority rule, the death must be a foreseeable result of the felony.
Our sources have a fantastic example about a burning house. Let's walk through this to test the foreseeability line.
Person A intentionally sets fire to a house. He is committing arson. Person B is a local firefighter. He rushes into the burning house to fight the blaze. The roof collapses and person B dies. Is person A guilty of felony murder?
Yes, absolutely. It is highly foreseeable that if you start a massive fire, a firefighter is going to show up and might die trying to put it out.
Correct. But now let's look at person C. Person C is the owner of the house. He is standing 2 blocks away, safely behind police lines, watching his house burn. He is so distraught about losing all his life's possessions that he suffers a massive heart attack and dies on the sidewalk. Is person A guilty of felony murder for person C's death?
I would argue no. A heart attack from grief 2 blocks away is a bizarre medical event. It's not the natural result of the fire itself.
And the courts agree with you. That death is unforeseeable, so there's no felony murder charge for person C. The death must be a natural, probable result of the dangerous situation you created.
Excellent. We are on to limitation number 4, termination of the felony.
The rule says the death must happen during the commission of the felony. But we have to define when a felony actually ends. If you rob a bank, is the robbery legally over the exact second you step out the front doors?
I assume not. The getaway is part of the crime?
Correct. Deaths caused while fleeing from the crime are still part of the felony murder. If you run a red light in your getaway car and hit a pedestrian, that is felony murder. The felony continues until the felon reaches a place of temporary safety.
Temporary safety, what does that look like?
It means you have successfully escaped immediate pursuit. Let's say you rob a bank, drive across town without being chased, park your car in your home garage, go inside, make a sandwich, and sit on the couch to watch TV. You have reached a place of temporary safety.
So the felony is officially over.
Yes. If the police figure out it was you and they show up at your house an hour later and a shootout happens where an officer dies that is not felony murder based on the bank robbery, you might be charged with regular murder for shooting at the cops, but the bank robbery felony murder window has closed.
Okay, temporary safety is the finish line. Now we arrive at the biggest, most heavily tested limitation. Limitation number 5. It's called the red line view. Listener, if you only remember one thing from this section, make it this. It's all about co-felons and police shootouts. Let me set up a scenario. I decide to rob a convenience store with a partner. We both walk in with loaded guns. We demand the cash. But the cashier is armed. The cashier pulls out a shotgun and fires at us. He misses me, but he shoots and kills my partner. The victim of my crime just killed my co-felon. Am I legally guilty of my partner's murder under the felony murder rule?
Under the majority view across the country, which is known as the red line view, the answer is NO. You are not liable for felony murder.
I really need to understand the legal philosophy here. We were committing a violent felony, someone died. Why am I off the hook for my partner's death?
You have to look at how the law classifies the cashier's action. The cashier was defending his life and his property. Therefore, the cashier shooting your partner is classified as a justifiable homicide. The courts have decided that it twists the logic of criminal law too far to take a justifiable killing committed by a victim or a police officer and use it to slap a murder charge on you. The red line view protects you from being charged with the death of your own partner at the hands of the good guys.
Wow. Okay, so if the cops or the victims shoot my partner, I don't get charged with his murder. But let me change the scenario. Let's say the cashier shoots at us. The bullet misses my partner completely, goes through a window, and accidentally strikes and kills an innocent person walking their dog outside. Am I guilty of that innocent bystander's death?
This is a classic bar exam question. It depends on which theory of liability the specific jurisdiction follows. There are 2 theories you must know. The first is the agency theory. Under the agency theory, the felony murder rule only applies if the actual killer was your agent, meaning either you or your partner pulled the trigger. In your example, the cashier pulled the trigger. The cashier is obviously not your agent. Therefore, under the agency theory, you are not guilty of the innocent bystander's death.
That makes logical sense. I shouldn't be responsible for the cashier's bad aim. What is the other theory?
The other theory is the proximate cause theory. This theory looks at the big picture. It says, you and your partner walked into a store with loaded guns. You started this entire chain of chaos. It was entirely foreseeable that gunfire would break out. Because you proximately caused the deadly situation, you are liable for the innocent bystander's death, even though the cashier pulled the trigger.
Those are 2 totally opposite results. The MBE will have to tell you whether to apply the agency theory or the proximate cause theory. Let's do a comprehensive mini recap of Section 5. The 5 limits on felony murder. 1. You must actually be legally guilty of the felony. Substantive defenses like insanity work, procedural defenses like statute of limitations don't. 2, the felony must be independent. You can't use the fatal battery itself as the felony. 3, the death must be foreseeable. The firefighter dying is foreseeable. The owner's heart attack 2 blocks away is not. 4, the felony ends when you reach a place of temporary safety, like eating a sandwich at home. 5, the red line view. You are not liable for felony murder if the cops or victims kill your partner. And for innocent bystanders killed by cops or victims, remember the difference between agency theory, no liability, and proximate cause theory, full liability.
That was a brilliant summary of a very dense topic. Now we need to talk about the physical mechanics of death. We're moving to causation and homicide.
For any of these homicide charges to stick, the prosecutor has to prove that the defendant's act actually caused the death.
Yes. And causation in criminal law requires 2 distinct parts. You must have both, cause in fact and proximate cause.
Let's define cause in fact first.
Cause in fact is the simple but-for test. Would the victim have died but for your actions? If the answer is no, then you are the cause in fact. It's a purely mechanical question.
Pretty straightforward. What is proximate cause?
Proximate cause is the legal filter. It asks if the death was a natural and probable result of your conduct. Did the death happen in a way that was generally foreseeable? I like to think of it as a game of legal billiards. You hit the cue ball, that's your action. The cue ball hits another ball, which hits another ball. asks how many balls can bounce around the table before that final shot is no longer legally your fault.
That's a great analogy. Our outline highlights several tricky causation rules where the bar examiners will test how many balls bounce on the table. Let's look at the year and a day rule.
At strict common law, the rule was rigid. For a defendant to be liable for homicide, the victim had to die within 1 year and 1 day from the time the injury was inflicted. If they clung to life and died 1 year and 2 days later, you could not be prosecuted for homicide, even if medical science proved beyond a doubt that your gunshot was the sole cause of death.
That seems incredibly outdated.
It is. It was created in an era before modern medicine. Today, people stay on life support for years. Most modern states have abolished this rule, but because it is a foundational common law rule, it is still tested. If the MBE question explicitly says at common law, you must apply the year and a day rule.
Here's another tricky causation trap: hastening an inevitable result. Let's say a victim has a terminal illness. The doctors are certain they only have 24 hours left to live. I walk into their hospital room, unplug their life support, and they die immediately. Am I the legal cause of their death? They were going to die the very next day anyway.
Yes, you are the legal cause. The law says that an act that hastens an inevitable result is still a legal cause of death. Think about it philosophically. Every human being is inevitably going to die. We all have a ticking clock. By shortening their life, even by just 24 hours, you legally caused their death at that specific moment. The law doesn't care if society might view it as an act of mercy. For causation, you caused it.
Okay, here is another big trap: the pre-existing condition. You'll often hear this called the eggshell skull doctrine. I have a hypothetical for this one. I get into a petty argument with my neighbor. I want to teach him a lesson, so I shoot him in the calf with a small caliber gun. I just want him to limp for a few ways. A normal person would just need a tight bandage and a few stitches. But unknown to me, my neighbor has severe hemophilia. His blood does not clot. He bleeds to death on his lawn from a minor leg wound. Am I liable for his murder? I didn't intend to kill him, and a normal person wouldn't have died.
It feels harsh, but yes, you are fully liable for murder. The rigid rule of law is you take your victim as you find them.
That feels deeply unfair. If I had no idea he had a medical condition.
Criminal law puts the burden of that risk on the attacker, not the victim. A pre-existing weakness or condition that makes a victim more susceptible to death does not break the chain of causation. It does not matter that a healthy person would have survived the gunshot. You shot him, and his specific frail body died from it. You are the proximate cause.
Take your victim as you find them. What about intervening acts? Let's say I hurt someone, but then an outside force steps in and actually delivers the fatal blow. What breaks the chain of legal billiards?
An intervening act will shield you from liability only if it is mere coincidence or completely outside the foreseeable sphere of risk.
Give me an example of a pure coincidence.
You are driving negligently and you swerve into the wrong lane. To avoid your car, another driver takes a weird, unaccustomed route home through a different neighborhood. On that weird route, their car is struck by a freak bolt of lightning and they die. Are you guilty of manslaughter for forcing them onto that road?
No. A lightning strike is an act of God. It's a pure coincidence. It breaks the chain of causation.
Correct. But what about medical care? This is where the MBE will hammer you. I shoot someone. They are rushed to the hospital doctors are negligent, they administer the wrong medication, and the victim dies from an allergic reaction to the medicine, not the bullet. Am I off the hook because the doctor messed up?
Listeners, lean in. This is the ultimate trap.
The answer is no. You are not off the hook. The law considers standard negligent medical care to be a highly foreseeable risk. We all know that hospitals are chaotic and mistakes happen. When you shoot someone, you force them into that risky medical system. You are legally responsible for the normal mistakes that happen there. The chain is not broken.
Is there any level of medical mistake that does break the chain? What if the doctor is completely intoxicated and decides to amputate the wrong leg for fun?
That is the line. If the medical negligence rises to the level of gross negligence or intentional medical mistreatment, then it becomes unforeseeable. That breaks the chain of causation. But simple, ordinary medical mistakes do not save you.
What if the intervening act comes from the victim themselves? I shoot someone, they are in the hospital, the doctors say a simple blood transfusion will save their life, but the victim refuses the transfusion for religious reasons, and they die. Am I liable?
Yes. Most jurisdictions say you are liable. You created the deadly risk. The victim's choice to refuse medical care is considered a foreseeable possibility. What if the victim is an unbearable, agonizing pain from your gunshot and commits suicide to escape the pain? The courts will often find that suicide foreseeable as well. You are still the proximate cause.
Okay, we need to bring all this together. The outline provides an ultimate summary example that touches on malice, provocation, and causation all at once. I'm going to read this scenario from the text. I want you to walk through the analysis step by step. Person A comes upon person B. Person B is letting the air out of a tire on person A's car. Person A shouts at B. Person B picks up a heavy rock and throws it at A, shouting obscenities. B then turns and runs away. But A is furious. A goes to his car, pulls out a gun, and shoots at B as B is running. He hits B in the leg. B goes to the hospital for surgery to remove the bullet. At the hospital, the anesthesiologist uses the wrong gas by mistake. B dies from the gas. Wounds of this sort are not normally deadly. A testifies under oath that he only intended to wound B in the leg as revenge for the flat tire.
That is a brilliant, dense MBE fact pattern. Let's slice it up.
Step 1. Did person A have malice aforethought? Person A swore under oath he only wanted to wound B in the leg.
Yes, A had malice. Even if we believe he only intended to wound, B with a bullet. Shooting someone with a gun qualifies as intent to inflict great bodily injury. That is one of the 4 states of mind for malice aforethought.
Step 2. Was it first-degree murder?
If the jurisdiction requires premeditation for first degree, A probably lacks it. He didn't plan this out. It happened very fast in an emotional state, so it is likely second-degree murder.
Step 3. Is there provocation to drop this down from murder to voluntary manslaughter?
We have to look at the exact facts. B shouted obscenities. We know the mere words rule. Words are never enough. But B didn't just yell. B threw a heavy rock at A. A jury could certainly find that having a heavy rock hurled at you is adequate provocation. It's a battery. If the jury believes that would make a reasonable person snap, the charge drops to voluntary manslaughter.
Step 4. What about causation? The bullet did not kill B. The doctor's wrong gas killed B. Wounds like that are not normally deadly.
We apply our 2 tests. First, cause and fact. But for A shooting B, B would not be in the hospital getting surgery. So A is the factual cause. Second, proximate cause. The doctor made a negligent mistake with the anesthetic gas. Does normal medical negligence break the chain? No, it's foreseeable. Unless the doctor's mistake was intentionally malicious or grossly negligent, A is still the legal cause of B's death.
That example wraps up everything beautifully. Let's do a mini recap for causation. Cause and fact is the simple but-for test. Proximate cause is the foreseeability test. You take your victim exactly as you find them, eggshell, skull, and all. Hastening an inevitable death is still causing a death. And remember the golden rule, normal medical mistakes do not save you. Only wild coincidences like lightning strikes or grossly negligent doctors break the chain.
We are on the final stretch. We spent this entire time talking about hurting and killing people. But there's another category of offenses against the person. What if you don't hurt them, but you just trap them or move them against their will? Let's finish with crimes against liberty. False imprisonment and kidnapping.
Let's start with false imprisonment. In plain English, what are the elements?
It is the unlawful confinement of a person without their valid consent.
What does confinement actually mean on a test? Do I have to lock them in a vault?
Confinement simply means the victim is compelled to go somewhere they do not want to go, or they are compelled to remain where they do not want to remain. You can confine someone with physical barriers, with physical force, with direct threats of force, or even just a compelling show of force.
I want to test the boundaries of confinement. Let's say I lock someone in a ground floor bedroom. The door is deadbolted, but the room has a large open window right next to the ground. It would be incredibly easy for the victim to just climb out the window and walk away. Are they legally confined?
This is a key MBE tip. The law says that if there is a safe, reasonable alternative route of escape available, it is not confinement. The victim cannot claim false imprisonment if they could just easily step out a ground floor window.
What if we change the facts slightly? The door is locked, there is an open window, but the bedroom is on the 10th floor of an apartment building.
A 10-story drop is obviously not a safe or reasonable alternative route. Therefore, they are confined.
What about the consent element? If I tell someone to stay in a room and they say, okay, fine, it's not false imprisonment, right?
Correct. But the consent must be validly and freely given by someone who has the legal capacity to give it. If you use threats of violence to get them to agree to stay, the consent is invalid. If you deceive them into staying, it's invalid. And most importantly, if the victim is a young child or severely mentally impaired, they legally cannot give valid consent, no matter what they say.
Okay, so false imprisonment is trapping someone unlawfully without a safe exit. How is kidnapping different?
At very old common law, kidnapping meant forcibly sending someone to another country. It was an extreme crime.
I assume the modern law has broadened that considerably.
Yes, Under modern law, kidnapping is basically an aggravated form of false imprisonment. It involves a confinement we just talked about, plus an additional element.
What is the extra element?
It requires either moving the victim, which the law calls asportation, or hiding the victim in a secret place.
How far do I have to move them to trigger a kidnapping charge? Is dragging them 10 feet enough?
It depends entirely on the jurisdiction. Some states require substantial, extreme movement, but most modern statutes require only some movement. Even moving a victim a relatively short distance can be enough. And remember, some statutes require no movement at all, as long as you hide the victim in a secret concealed location.
Our sources mention aggravated kidnapping. What facts elevate the crime?
Several things can trigger aggravated kidnapping. Kidnapping for ransom is the classic example. Kidnapping for the purpose of committing another crime, like abducting someone to rob them in a secondary location. Kidnapping for offensive purposes, like sexual assault, and child stealing,
Why is child stealing listed as a separate category?
because it involves taking a child away from their legal guardian. And remember what we said about consent. Even if you just entice a child with a toy and the child happily and willingly agrees to walk away with you, it is still kidnapping. A child is legally incapacitated by age. They cannot give valid consent to be moved.
Okay, here is the trickiest question in this entire section. The bar examiners love to test the overlap between crimes. Here is the scenario. I walk into a convenience store with a gun. I point it at the cashier. I demand the money. That is a robbery. But the cash is locked in a safe in the back room. I force the cashier at gunpoint to walk 20 feet from the front register into the back room to open the safe. I confined them and I moved them. Is that robbery and kidnapping?
This is a huge MBE tip. Pay close attention. The answer is usually no. It is just robbery.
I moved them. That's asportation. I fulfilled the elements.
You did, technically.
Yeah.
But the courts recognize that many crimes, like robbery or rape, naturally and unavoidably involve some minor movement or confinement. To add a completely separate kidnapping charge on top of the robbery, the movement must substantially increase the risk to the victim beyond the risk inherent in the underlying crime.
So forcing the cashier 20 feet into the back room to open the safe, that's just part of the mechanics of robbing the store. It doesn't put them in substantially more danger than they were already in with a gun pointed at them.
Yeah, exactly. It is incidental to the robbery. The crimes merge. But let's change the facts. You rob the cashier. Then, to make your escape easier, you force the cashier into the trunk of your car and you drive them 10 miles out into the woods and leave them there. That movement is not necessary to rob the store. And locking them in a trunk and driving them to a remote location substantially increases their risk of harm. In that case, you are guilty of robbery and kidnapping.
That is a brilliant distinction. When analyzing these overlap questions, always ask yourself, did the movement make the victim much less safe than the original crime already did? Here is our final mini recap for Section 7. False imprisonment is trapping someone unlawfully. Remember the safe exit exception: if they can climb out a window, they aren't confined. Kidnapping is trapping them plus moving them or hiding them secretly. Kids cannot consent to being moved. And for the robbery overlap, the movement must substantially increase the risk to the victim, or else it is just a robbery charge.
We have made it to the end of a very dense, very complex outline.
We did it. That was a massive amount of material. Listeners, you are doing incredible work just by sticking with this. I am going to give you a high-energy final recap of the biggest concepts we tackled today. Ready? We covered hitting people. That's battery. General intent, criminal negligence is enough. We covered scaring people. That's assault. Remember the trap: if the statute requires present ability, an unloaded gun is not an assault. We covered the 4 types of malice for murder: intent to kill, intent to hurt badly, reckless indifference, and felony murder. We covered when a death drops to manslaughter, heat of passion. The mere words trap is real. We covered the limits of felony murder. The red line view is crucial. You are not liable if the cops or victims kill your partner. We covered causation. Medical mistakes don't break the chain, but lightning strikes do. Take your victim as you find them. And we covered crimes of liberty, like false imprisonment and kidnapping, where the movement must substantially increase the risk.
You did a fantastic job breaking all of that down. Listener, I want to remind you that the MBE is just a test. It is a test of spotting these exact rules hidden inside a story. It is a game of pattern recognition. Staying calm is half the battle. You know these rules now. When you see a fact pattern about a guy in a hospital getting the wrong anesthetic gas, you are going to smile because you know exactly what the answer is.
You absolutely have the knowledge to beat this test. Before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought, something to mull over as you close your books today.
Think about how criminal law defines concepts like intent and foreseeability. These are profoundly human concepts, built by judges over hundreds of years. We talk about how standard medical negligence is a foreseeable risk today. But our world is getting more complex very quickly. We're moving into an era of AI-driven medical diagnosis, fully automated self-driving cars, and hyper-advanced robotics.
It's moving so fast.
Exactly. How will juries in the near future decide what a normal person should foresee? When a black box AI makes an inexplicable medical mistake, is that foreseeable negligence? Or is it a bizarre coincidence like a lightning strike? The core human elements of these centuries-old common law rules are about to collide with a very unpredictable technological future. The legal definitions of reasonable and foreseeable are going to have to evolve drastically.
That is wild to think about. The law is never static. It is always shifting and adapting, just like that X-ray machine we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive. The lines on the legal film are never as clear as we want them to be. The landscape is murky, but today you learned how to navigate through the mud. You know exactly where to shine the light. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep reviewing your notes, keep practicing those multiple choice questions, and good luck with your studying. You've got this.